All right. That sounds like we're ready to go. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Steve Klein, and I'm a program director here with the California Community College's Technology Center. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so glad to have you, and thank you for making the time. This session is focused on, let me think my screen. Hold on. There we go. This session is focused on the use of SuperGlue in the fight against college application fraud. And specifically, this webinar will demonstrate how the event notification table can help colleges to verify a student's identification status. This advancement is a big deal for us and for the colleges and allows for increased opportunities for us to send data to colleges after changes have been made or updates are made to that data. And these changes might include student information data, application information, or fraud status changes. And we'll see today from our guests from Los Rios and other voices sharing how this events notification table is making a difference at colleges to combat fraud. So we have a number of folks who are going to be joining us today talking about this topic. And you see John Sills, our product manager for SuperGlue, our guests from Los Rios Community College District have joined us, as well as our Technology Center implementation engineers. You might hear other voices as well supporting this topic. The format for today is we have a number of slides to share with you, a presentation, as you can see from our guests at our college districts. And we will do our best to answer questions after each section and throughout the session. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll go from there. So without further ado, I want to pass this off to John Sills, our product manager for SuperGlue, to take us a little deeper into the event notification table that is part of the SuperGlue framework. So, John?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. As Steve mentioned, I'm the product owner for the SuperGlue data integration platform. Kind of wanted to give a little bit of an overview before we got too far. I've been involved with SuperGlue since its inception at the Tech Center almost 10 years ago. I like to explain SuperGlue as maybe the train tracks, the locomotives, conductors, and signals for data delivery between all 116 community colleges and a host of systems of truth throughout the system. So that includes everything from CCC Apply applications to Lucian Ethos, as well as multiple measure service. Today, we're going to drill down into some of the information we're getting from OpenCCC, which is the account system where students go to create an account before they fill out an application and have it sent to a specific college or district. Can you go to the next slide, Steve? So in March of this year, we deployed SuperGlue 5.1.0 and included the addition of a new events table. This events table was set up to allow for us to send events to colleges based on changes in data that we receive and we think are important. Our initial rollout of this was for ID.me status. So students don't have to go through ID.me initially. They can come back to it later on. So we needed to create a flexible architecture that would allow for this. As well now, 2 weeks ago, we released DMV wallet integration, which ties into the Department of Motor Vehicles and allows students another validation verification path. The architecture we set up allows for us to add any number of different types of events to be able to be sent to colleges. We have Los Rios here today to introduce kind of how they've integrated the ID.me status, and I expect that they'll probably be also picking up the DMV wallet status here in the future. There's a link on this slide, and we are going to send the slide deck out to public documentation for SuperGlue. If you'd like to read more information about specifically the events table. Next slide, Steve. So the event trigger for identity verification status is a change in either one of these fields, ID.me status or verification status. These changes can get this status can be changed when students make changes to some of their information, specifically listed here, their first name, last name, address, social security number, or date of birth. If any of those items are changed within OpenCCC, it generates an event trigger, which then sends an event to the colleges where that student has sent applications via CCC Apply. Um, so to dig a little deeper into it, we can go into the next slide, and we'll hand over the mic to our guests from Los Rios, who are going to explain how they've integrated this into their systems.
Okay, I will get started first. My name is Ching Schuler. I lead the integration and development teams at Los Rios and am responsible for the adoption of the CCC provided technologies and services, which include the CCC applied admissions application processing. Los Rios have leveraged the SuperGlue data exchange platform to receiving our application data, and then we have adopted ERP agnostic SuperGlue, which decision was made to decouple from our PeopleSoft SS system is because it's make it adoption SuperGlue is much easier, which doesn't get impacted by PeopleSoft constant upgrade and patches. Right now, we're receiving the application data to SuperGlue staging tables, and we host it on the AWS. And before I try to give an overview of our Los Rios journey of combating fraudulent fraudulent data. Is what at Los Rios, though, we have majorly focused on the effort on keeping the bad actors from getting into our ERP system. So we focus on admissions processing heavily. And because that's the process in creating the new users for our system. So along with the continuing improvement with CCC, Tech Center fraud detections, during the years, we had to build many customizations to detect the fraudulent applications. However, everyone knows the tactics of fraud people are engaging keep evolving. So we have, during the years, acquired a couple other applications to help us to detect the changes, which is IPQ, IP quality score here listed, and the secure. Those two applications help us to identify and validate our applications. And we run most of our applicants through our Los Rios fraud process. However, though, we do have a couple exceptions, like if the CCC applied data coming in with fraud status 6, means a staff in the colleges has approved the identity of this application, we let them through, and the status 7 would be, if they're gone through some sort of identity verification. So we have that, and then even though with all those intentions and interventions, we still find ourselves identify fraudulent actors got into our system, some even got enrollment there. So our security internal auditors are constantly monitoring our systems. If we identify those bad actors, suspicious activities, we would creating in PeopleSoft, we call service indicators. We flag those people. So we keep track on those people, and then we drop them from the enrollment if they have gone into the enrollment, or and then we log them out of our system. So for the IDMe, since IDMe got deployed, I think it's over a year now, we have been getting IDMe data into our PeopleSoft custom tables for further processing, along with our other application data. However, though, we weren't really focused on leveraging those data until recently. We tried to meet the mandate of state Department of Education, not state, but federal government, for financial aid. FAFSA applicants need to be gone through mandatory some sort of identity verification process, and IDMe was one of the acceptable method. So that is what we actually taking more closely look of this IDMe. And of course, we're very excited when we see the, because IDMe, when we have before the event table coming in, it's only focused on the application who, applicants who submitted an application. And it's kind of like a snapshot. If people's identification might be changing, status might be changing, it won't come to us. So we were rather excited about IDMe event table coming in to allow more real-time, up-to-date IDMe status coming in. So what we did is we created a kind of like another custom table called IDMe custom table that is prior to DMV has been rolled out. We're using that to capture the latest IDMe status for our user. So that is, then we can provide our financial aid offices a tool for them to, mainly like a query tools for them to run the financial aid students, potential financial aid students, run through that local table to validate their identification requirement. Do they validate their identification properly? And so that is what we have there. And we would they would give student options, either come into office in person, or they can direct students out to go back to the Open CCC, so they can go through the IDMe process outside of the application process, and we can get the data to us. So John or someone, could you guys give me another slide? Yeah. So now I was talking about we're creating that is just a visual of the customer record we created for capture IDMe status, the latest status. You can see we capture their CCIDs, we capture their previous potentially their IDMe status, but more importantly, we kind of listed the source of the IDMe data come from. If you see the event ID there, that means the latest status for this person's IDMe status is come from the event table. And if you don't see the event, then you will see the app ID. That means it's come from the application. So that is pretty much the data structure we have. And later Brad can go into more detail. That's the local customization we build the logic to calculate the latest IDMe status. So our financial aid office can leverage these information to validate their students. I think I'm ready for next step. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, now before Brad is taking over, is we're using Boomi to facilitate all the integrations and building out the processes for fraud check, for application process. For people who are not familiar with Boomi, it's just a platform as a services, is act like an integration middleware. So they can provide, at Los Rios here, my integration team is a centralized environment for us to build and manage, numerous, many of application processes. So we have our logic. I'm sure other campuses can use in a different kind of platform or programming languages and to achieve the same outcome. So with that said, I think I'm hoping I got people into some idea where we're at with our fraud detection effort and the groundwork leading to this point to consume more data, more real-time data for the event notification data. So I will let Brad, who's helping me build processes to leverage the event table, to take over next slides, next sets of data. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheng. My name is Brett Schultz, and I'm a PeopleSoft consultant at Los Rios. I used to work with the tech center, be an implementation engineer, so it's nice to be on the other side and see how the colleges use the data. So As Ching mentioned, we have used the ERP agnostic SuperGlue tables. So those are the tables that it's hosted in AWS. And currently, their current process is the Boomi process takes the data from the apply table, including the initial ID status fields, and they send it to the custom PeopleSoft table, which is the LR app data. And that is what is used to matriculate students and just go through the process. So that process runs every 10 minutes just to pick up new applications. And then what we added a new Boomi process to look at the event table. And that one takes the payload, which there's one field in the event table, which is a payload, which has all the previous and current, all different values related to ID.me. So we take that and we parse that and we use the date time. Well, first thing we do is we take the CC ID and see if it exists in PeopleSoft. If it doesn't, we wait, we skip it and then wait 24 hours and then, or it checks again, just so that maybe if there's a delay in an app getting processed, this event won't be skipped. So we'll get the app processed and then the event will come around later and give us the latest status, just so we have that, so we don't miss any. So, and then we also look at the confirmation date timestamps in the event table and compare it to the table we have in PeopleSoft, which is the ID.me status table, and say, okay, is this event that came in, is it later than an event that's in the table? And if it is, we'll update the table with the new status. And if it's the same or older, we'll just skip it. And that one runs every hour and just picks up the new events as they come in. So if you go to the next slide, please. So, I mean, that's that. I guess let me just close on the last slide. So that's kind of really the process we have. We have two sources of ID.me data, and we're consolidating them into one single PeopleSoft table that right now the financial aid office can query, because previously they were querying just the CC apply table, which had the ID.me status, but again, that was the static table, static value. And then with the event table, we didn't want them to have to query two tables and determine which one is the latest value. So we're doing that work for them and putting the latest value into that new custom table. And then as the screenshots show, we just have a query of against that table that the financial aid office can use. So, you know, as we mentioned at the beginning, 5.3.1 came out with the DMV stuff. So we are immediately, plans are to look at incorporating that and leveraging the source identity field, specifically because for the financial aid office, they are only interested in right now is the ID.me verification status. So, before, let me just, Sarah had a question. So to understand, you use Boomi to create the custom table. We created the custom table in PeopleSoft in the SIS, and then Boomi, the Boomi middleware process does the querying of the AWS table and then populates it into the PeopleSoft table. So it's the middleware we're doing that. But we created the custom table in the SIS. You're welcome. So yeah, so we need to differentiate between ID.me verification and DMV verification. So we're testing 5.3.1 in pilot now, and we are going to be updating our Boomi process to leverage the payload, the new payload fields, specifically the ID.me one. So we're going to basically, in our logic, we're going to say we're only going to select events where the verification source identity is ID.me. And then process those. Just because at this point in time, we don't have a need for the DMV status, but you know, we could add that in the future. And then long-term plans, we want to add the status and figure out where in SIS PeopleSoft we can add this so that users can see this status more easily rather than running a query, you know, if they're working with a student. Also add an ability to override that status in case, a student is unverified, but they come into the office and have a manual verified, we want to be able to store that somewhere, but say, hey, this was a manual verification. The ID status is unverified, but they manually verified. And then the last step is we're still debating this, whether to consolidate it into one table with both ID and DMV statuses. And we're trying to figure out how the best to store that. Let's just say, someone had an ID status, it expired, and then they came back and verified with the DMV. Do we want to, in that custom table, store that history and things like that? So we're trying to figure out the best way to store that data, as well as, the need for it from the functional people. Next slide, please. All right, so just some feedback we have for our experience. First is understanding the event data and how and when it's generated. It's just because currently I think there's 2 events that come in, and one's called the federated identity link event, and the other is called the update profile. And we had to research the data and figure out, read the release notes and see that I think we just wanted to concentrate on the federated identity link event, so we could ignore those other ones. It just, depending on what the business owners want and what data they need. So to work with them to make sure this is the data we have, how do you want us to present it to you, or what is your need for that? And for example, do they need to know a history? Do they need to know that if someone was unverified and then they submitted their application and then became verified at this date? So we currently don't have history stored, but the users are still working with the data and kind of learning how to use it. So as our testing, we had a couple bugs that we ran into just as we were going through the data. One of them was, just some instances where, we had a null verification status, but there was a date timestamp. As you see, the JIRA ticket in that one is, I was just informed the other day that's in QA, so we'll be looking forward to test that one. And then again, just some mismatches in the status between the initial application and the event. So in most cases, we're always taking if there is a tie, we take the event table because that's more up to date. And then just for estimates on how to do this, we had 2 parts because of the Boomi. So we had to do the Boomi integration, which is completely separate and also feeds into the other CRM. So we had to make sure that that didn't affect that process. So we had that process about a couple of weeks, and then the other process was building a new table in the SIS, and then also modifying the current process, which reads the app data table and processes that. We had to add a step to say, okay, take the application and the initial ID me fields and let's put that into our new custom table. So we added a step at the bottom of that process to do that extra step. So with testing and everything, that took about a couple of weeks as well. So I think, was there any more? I think that's it, right? Is that the last reels?
This is the last slide. Yeah. Thanks,
Okay, great. All right, awesome.
That's great. Before we go and into the next section and talk about banner environment at City College San Francisco, just want to give folks any chance to have questions. I don't see any in chat right now. We can certainly come back for those to the Los Rios team, but let's see. Okay, then let's see. So I understand I got the Boomi question answered. All right. Well, then why don't we shift gears and let me introduce Martin Rudd, who's our implementation engineer with the Technology Center, who will speak about the banner environment at San Francisco. Oh, wait, let me just get to a question here real quick, Martin. How would staff verify if there's some places to enter that from Jason? Is that a question our Los Rios friends can address?
Yeah, right now we're not capture any staff verified users that's something I think on our future plan we would like to. Right now, if they come into person, we say if they got stopped by one of our fraud checks during the application upload, and if they come, they got instructed to show their IDs, we verify them. Our staff member just going there to push through the application manually. They allowed to do so to override the fraud status. For financial aid, though, I'm not quite clear, but I think they would just take that students who coming in, verify their identities, remove that students from the requirement to do the ID verification. That is, so far we have, unfortunately, we don't have a location for them to make the changes and to capture it. Besides the application data processing, we do keep who is the operator ID who did the override to push the application through. I don't know if that's answered the question or not.
Anyone else want to have input into that, Jason's question?
So I see someone was saying mark them as 6. Is that what? But
We do have
marking
Jane on the call. Jane, are you available? I mean, for what that status of staff is, I know it was one of the ones we included in requirements, but oh, Jane can't unmute herself. Let me see if I can, Jane.
Trying to get to that, John.
Hey, thanks, guys. Yes, there is a way that staff can verify now, though it's tied to creating an account on behalf of a student. There's an OpenCCC admin role through the CCC Apply Administrator that allows you to create an account on behalf of students. And as part of that, you are staff verifying them, because when you do this, when you create an account on their behalf, you are verifying that they're a real person. That was largely created for the use case of incarcerated students and the program folks who work with them. However, this is, of course, something that can be used also, same process, for staff to be able to mark students as verified once they've validated them with in person at the college. And we have a project in the backlog to alter the OpenCCC account creation so that staff can actually use it to pull up an existing account and then mark that student as verified. And then that would flow through this whole process. So, so there is a way that we're providing for staff to verify through the CCC Apply admin area. So that'll be upcoming, and it's something that we're trying to prioritize because we know it's something that a lot of people have asked us for.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jane.
All right. We'll come back for any other questions for Los Rios. But without further ado, Martin, can I turn it over to you to talk about San Francisco?
Yeah, thank you. So San Francisco, unfortunately, was not able to join the meeting to present themselves. I'll attempt to do them justice, but in most part, the sequence of events that Los Rios just highlighted are predominantly the same for San Francisco, with some just minor exceptions. We'll be talking effectively about processes that are specific more towards Banner and the use of some Banner specific holding tables. So San Francisco uses a batch process, and this would be specifically suitable for the Banner sys type. So during their hourly batch process itself, they're going to be processing applications in a kind of a sequential manner, attempting to verify applications that have been pre-verified, and then suspending those applications that have not been verified and need further assistance in verification. So as they go through this process, the applications that need further processing will be resident in their scissor cap table. And next slide. So as the SisterCap table is the main holding table for verification purposes, they will suspend here for several days while San Francisco will then begin monitoring the events through the event table for additional verifications that might come post-delivery, application delivery. And once a verification does come through, then they become released and will make their way into the Spriden people table for Banner itself. Next slide. So within the Spriden table, they've actually incorporated some additional field components that they use to track the verification and the verification details that came with that. Go ahead, next slide. So San Francisco also utilizes the alternative verification service of Socure, to help resolve any verifications when an applicant may have issues with ID.me. But the encouragement is to use ID.me at all possible attempts. And they've also, San Francisco also provided some time estimates for how much this data integration tends to consume for them. If you have any specific questions with this particular, would be more than happy to help relay those to San Francisco. But that's about all that we have for San Francisco at this time. Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. As Martin says, we have lots of folks who can support your colleges. As many of you know, our college experience managers, as part of our enabling services team, can be reached at the email address on the screen. Our staff support address is listed here as well, and then in our community support environment is at the bottom of the screen. For any other questions with to get information to the team, our infrastructure and data team, or our colleagues working on the application and as part of the student success suite that Jane leads, you can reach out to me with my email here. And so we'll continue answering questions as they come in. Jason has a question. Do they require ID.me for all apps, ID.me or Secure? Is that for San Francisco you're referring to specifically, Jason? Okay.
Well, yes, I think ID.me has been predominantly the source of verifications to this point. As of last Friday, we are now able to provide DMV related verifications. So you'll have both types now being available to you. But as Brett alluded to, federal requirements still allow for ID.me for verification, not necessarily DMV being a state entity. So there may be some hurdles in that regard.
Yeah. Jane, I don't know if you want to address more of that in a global sense with what Martin has already offered.
I could chime in, Steve, and you're right. The mobile driver's license is not going to meet the level 2 assurance that's required for financial aid. ID.me does. Secure has a service as well. But, from a low risk perspective, just to add a little bit more, right? We knew we were getting this data, but in a lot of cases, the ID.me data you were getting on the initial application was incomplete, but we knew students were going back and verifying later, going through the process. And we knew this stuff was being captured in the events table. So why don't we build a process to obtain, that subsequent data that's coming, right? The post-delivery. And that's when Ching and Brett, built it. Don't get hung up in the whole Boomi Salesforce. We've got a pretty convoluted application process at Los Rios, but use whatever tools you can to try to obtain that events table data, the updated ID.me. Take advantage of it wherever you can, right? Otherwise, these students are having to go through some type of in-person or Zoom, or our financial aid folks are having to put them through some other type of laborious, ID verification process. So why don't we cut that off, do what we can? And we built the solution using Boomi to obtain the events table data. But do yourself a favor, as mentioned there by Brett and Ching, make sure you understand how those 3 or 4 fields in that table work, what the data elements are. We got a lot of support from Martin for a better understanding. We needed to decide, all right, how do we determine that this stuff came in after the app or before? So, looking at date, time stamps, stuff like that. So, we've fumbled through it. We've got a solution right now. It certainly can be improved, and we're going to work on that. But I would say take advantage of this events table data and subsequent ID.me updates. Boomi is simply the process that we're using, an API call to get that data. Chang and Brett built a payload to do that, but obviously San Francisco built something. So use whatever tools you need to obtain that data, store it in a custom table if you want, or do some comparison, whatever works for you. This was a solution that we came up with, but there's lots of options and technical ways of accomplishing that. So yeah, and our financial aid folks are using that now, where we're not having to go through and verify, in a personal or, more labor intensive manner. If they passed ID.me within the past year, they're good. They've met that, I think it's NIST level 2, IAL2 or something like that. But that satisfies, gets them their aid faster, etc. So, and we're open to email. Ching, me, Brett, later we'll answer any questions we can, especially for some of the Oracle PeopleSoft schools, how we built this.
Great.
And I did want to say that I was kind of chatting with Brett in the background, and although, yeah, a lot of the processing is done in Boomi, there are PeopleSoft sides of things, creating the custom table and stuff, and I think they'd be willing to share that with other PeopleSoft schools, and then also Banner, we know, has a similar place to share, so we can talk with San Francisco about whether we can share that out as well, just to get people a start if you're interested. And then as far as the federal security level, we did reach out to the DMV, and they have said that they are also IIL, but they're actually level 3. So we're going to be making sure we're kind of double checking on all of that, but DMV should be a also acceptable method of verification. So more to come on that. We'll make a general announcement with some information on the documentation area, but looks like they are really good. And certainly the one thing that's really great about the DMV is it doesn't, if you use that, this is a direct link to the California DMV records. So, the capability of any fake IDs being used and stuff like that are practically none. So, so I think there are some things on the DMV side also that are, but we just have to make sure that we've nailed down specifically that level. But what they're sharing from, what the DMV has said, that they're good.
Shane. Looking at the chat, trying to address questions. Some are being answered by some of our staff. So a second to catch up, and we'll get to what hasn't been addressed. Let's see. The link. Do they ever import without verification, even for non-financial aid students?
For those reels, we do process applicants even without the ID.me verification. If they passed our local fraud checks, like IPQS or Secure, we would process them. Otherwise, we will put them on hold in our CRM system, and the office's A&R folks going to reach out to those applicants. So ID.me is not I guess, a hard stop for we to process some students.
Thank you. A question about the version of SuperGlue. Let's see. How do we verify what version of SuperGlue we're running? The XCTC underscore product underscore version table does not have a SuperGlue version in it. Corey responds, it's a different parts of SuperGlue. This table contains the parts you installed. Thanks for the response, Corey. Martin or others from Enabling Services, is there any more to add on the versioning of SuperGlue?
Yes, I think the current version of SuperGlue out there obviously is going to have the additional verification fields, and actually they're beginning to morph into more generic verification fields. The previous verification fields were tied specifically to ID.me. That over time will probably wane for, with the generic verification fields. Those verification fields won't arrive to your staging table application unless you're currently upgraded to the new 5.3.1 SuperGlue release. But the events table, you will still be able to take advantage with your current version of the adapter if you're running a prior version like the 5.2.1. That event itself will contain the new verification fields that you can interrogate.
Excellent, thank you. A question for the SAS banner schools and perhaps their delivery via Ethos from reading Scott's question.
Yes, Scott. We've built integrations for all of the applications for SAS schools, for international standard and Community College Promise Grant. We work with them based on kind of their availability and them requesting us to do further integrations. At this point, I'm not aware of any communications with them regarding getting the events table into Insight or any sort of a integration for this. So,
That might be the good question back to Lucian that some people have.
yeah, it might be a question for Deepa, and or she can, we can start to work on that. I'm not sure what their capacity is for being able to take on something like this.
We will certainly copy and paste those comments though in our Slack that we have with them.
Absolutely. Looks like folks responded to David's question about verifying in person. Anyone want to address that? Depends on the location. The colleges I mentioned did not accept those outside their service area. Others have jumped in. Does anybody else want to add to the verification on site to support the verification process? Okay. Question on what is Boomies answered. Sorry, catching up.
Yeah, it's a middleware platform for moving data around. Yeah, we evaluated using it a few years ago at the tech center, but I don't know. Mike might be able to elaborate a little more. The folks that are actually using it.
Yeah, don't get caught up on that. I don't think there's only a handful of California community colleges that use Boomi. We're using it for making API calls and pushing data from various platforms to the other. It's not cheap, so I can imagine a lot of you don't have it or don't license it, but don't get hung up on that. Whatever mechanism you're pulling the data out of SuperGlue into either a custom delivered, whatever table, however you're processing that, you can use that same technology to pull the events table to where you need to. So yeah, we push our app data to 2 different systems right now, so we needed some type of tool to do that.
Hey, great, thank you. It looks like we've got to all the questions, unless I'm overlooking something. Put one more in. How is AR quote verifying the data? I don't know if that's pertaining to one of our the examples that Los Rios has shared or San Francisco.
David, are you talking about verifying the that the person is truly valid? Is there, so in other words, not if IDMe calls them verified or the DMV calls them verified? Oh, verifying. Oh, how is AR verifying ID? Sometimes they're doing this, I know, by Zoom, but a lot of colleges are trying to enforce that the student come in person if they possibly can. And again, they're local tools. I think some of them are using as well. And you know, again, a lot of them are also backing off because again, you know, one of the problems that we've had that the ID verification options are trying to solve is the burden on A&R staff. So the recommendation is that A&R staff, if they're verifying identity, they try to reroute them if they're able to one of the options through their OpenCCC account. And I do want to make a point that students do need to access the verification for our system through their OpenCCC account. They've got to log into that account and then click the option they want to use from there. If they go directly to ID.me and try to verify, it's not part of our integration. And so we don't get that information back. And so they, nothing's going to change. We're not going to see them as verified until they actually go through the account. And you're saying, is it mandatory yet? It isn't yet. We understand there's a lot of conversation right now happening at the chancellor's office level that we've talked about. There hasn't been a formal decision yet, but I know that it's a desire. It's something they've desired to do. It's something that the Board of Governors has urged them to do, is to require ID verification. It's working out, of course, those edge cases and not wanting to be a blocker to students. So that's all being considered.
And thank you, Jason, for the Los Rios feedback to that question.
Joe Macklin had a question regarding how to determine whether you determine which version of SuperGlue you might happen to be on. Previously to the 5.3 release, the only way that you would know is if you actually contacted us directly or your CEM. They could then provide that information to you. But as of the 5.3 release, once you've upgraded to that level, we've integrated a new versions table within the staging table set. And you can then interrogate that versions table to always know what version of staging tables you've recently deployed and keep up to date that way. So we're going to be obviously encouraging everyone to upgrade to 5.3 at some point here in the near future. We're still working through some pilot validations before we make that generally available.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. All right. Well, it looks like we're coming up at the top of the hour. Again, I just want to say thank you on behalf of our colleagues at the Tech Center, our colleagues in the field at Los Rios. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to hear from our districts and their particular experiences. Martin, thank you for speaking on behalf of San Francisco. We are here to support any further questions or engagements you have, and we'll likely see more SuperGlue webinars coming along as we continue to advance the framework. This presentation will be sent out in a couple of weeks once we package it up and ready for distribution, so look for that. As we approach the top of the hour, I just want to take the opportunity to say again, thank you for joining. We wish you a very healthy and family-filled holiday season ahead, and we will look forward to seeing you all very much in the near future. So thank you again, and have a great afternoon all. This concludes our session for today.